issue that there are two concepts that we want to look at here. One of them in a confounding, consideration of confounding, is positive, negative, and qualitative confounding. When there is a possible confounder, and that confounder weakens the measure of association, whether an odds ratio or a relative risk. Let me just show this. You always have the OR crude, which is the unadjusted or confounded one, and you're comparing it with the adjusted one, OR adjusted, in order to determine whether the kind of confounding that existed was positive, negative, or qualitative. If this crude is bigger than the adjusted one, let me give an example. If you have an unadjusted odds ratio of, let's see, 4.5 as the crude, and then you have the adjusted odds ratio after adjusting for confounding, and it is 2.1. Between 4.5, before it was confounded, the adjusted one, which has removed the confounding, is smaller. Okay? It means that this confounded one had exaggerated the odds ratio. The true odds ratio is 2.1. But before you showed it by adjusting, the results were showing you a 4.5. In other words, it was showing you an exaggerated odds ratio. The true one is 2.1 after adjusting. The one that was crude before was bigger. So that bulge out is what they call the positive. So this one would be, we would say that it was positively confounded. This one, before adjusted, was positively confounded. Now it is not. It has come down to the true one. If, on the other hand, you had a 4.5 as your confounded one, crude or confounding, was 4.5, then you remove the confounding by the adjustment measures as we have seen, and you get it as 8. What was happening is that the true odds ratio is 8, but the confounding was showing you a 4.1. It was dwarfing it, in other words. It had weakened it. That is the negative confounding. It means it had confounded it in a negative direction. Okay? It had taken away from the true one. It had made it weaker. It looks 4.5. It could even look 3.5. After adjusting, it bulges up to 8. It means it had negatively confounded it. Okay? On the other hand, now these two we have shown are in one direction. Once there is no change of direction, it is remaining all risk. That both the positive and the negative that we saw here is actually, we call it quantitative confounding. Quantitative confounding. But we can have a scenario. Why we call it quantitative is that there was no change in direction of effect. What changed was the magnitude or the size of effect. For example, if I was betting that the risk of malaria is 2, it doubles, but it was confounded, I say that the chances of getting someone doing an outdoor job, chances of getting malaria have doubled. They are 2. In the absence of confounding, this is the accurate one, or I would use the word either accurate or true After adjusting for confounding, I actually find no. Actually, it is 4 times. The chances of getting malaria is actually 4. It is not 2. In both instances, both here and here, the chances of getting malaria are up. Except here they only double, here they more than double. They are 4 times high. But it is all in the upward what? Direction. The risk is going up. That is why we call it quantitative. There is no change of the direction of effect. I'm trying to emphasize this so that you can differentiate between that and the third element, which is qualitative confounding. What happens in qualitative confounding, which does not happen in quantitative, is that here there is a change of direction. Here we are changing the size of the effect from doubling to 4 times. From just increasing by 2 to increasing by 4, but it is all an increase. On the other hand, we can say from decreasing from 2 to 1.5, it's a decrease, but it is all a decrease. It has decreased from 1.5, from 2 to 1.5, or it has decreased from 2 to 1.4. It is one direction. There is a size difference. There is no change in the direction. Once this is happening, or the other increase, as we said, from doubling to 4 times, it is all an increase. That is quantitative confounding. There is no change in the direction of effect. But there are scenarios where there is both a change in the size, or the size of the effect, but there is also change in directionality of effect. For example, you measure being male and having malaria. Crude or confounded odds ratio gives you as 2. But after adjusting, the true effect actually gives you at 0.6. What this 0.6 now means is that instead of this being a risk, it has now changed to protection. Instead of saying that the risk of malaria doubles, we are actually saying the risk of malaria decreases. It lowers. So here, the confounder is showing us there is an increase in chance of malaria. Once you're male, chance of malaria doubles. It goes up by 2. When we adjust for the confounder of job, outdoor job, we find that no, actually the truth is, once you're male, then your chances of malaria go down. A 0.6 odds ratio tells us that you are 40% protected. You're 40% protected from malaria once you have an outdoor job. Whereas the confounded one was telling us, no, you're not protected. Actually, you're at risk. Your risk doubles. So once you see this scenario of change, there is a change in the number, but there is also change in the direction of effect. We thought that the effect of being male is to increase your chance of malaria. Now, after adjustment, we are seeing that actually being male lowers your chance of malaria. The type of confounding here that existed is what we call qualitative confounding. So when you measure confounding by the same methods that we have demonstrated, you evaluate it using the data, using the stratified data. You compare the stratum-specific odds ratios with the crude, which is the unadjusted one. Once you do that, and you arrive at a conclusion that there was confounding, the next is to do the adjusted odds ratio, okay? The Mantel-Haenszel measure. Once you do the Mantel-Haenszel odds ratio, you're going to compare that Mantel-Haenszel not with these stratum-specific measures, but with the crude here. And you compare, has it become lower than 1.71, or has it become higher? Or has it actually moved from 1.71, it is now 0.3, meaning it has changed direction. Once it goes below 1, it has changed direction. That becomes qualitative confounding. If it has not changed direction, it remains 1 point or 2 point or 3, 4 and above, it is quantitative. All you need to compare it is with the odds ratio with the crude and decide whether it is positive or negative, depending on whether it has increased above this or slightly decreased compared to this one. Okay? So finally, the other concept that we want to look at is the concept of residual confounding. Having appreciated positive, negative, and qualitative confounding, we want to look at the concept of residual confounding. Now, what do we mean by residual confounding? We have said that when you're designing a study, you measure your exposure and your outcome. You now look out for other potential factors that may influence this exposure-outcome association. Who are the potential confounders? Then you look at the data and you evaluate for them using the stratification, using the model fitting, using the matching. Okay? But many times, we do all these methods, and our purpose is to end up with an adjusted measure of association. But sometimes we do that and still remain with a confounded measure of association. Now, when that happens, it means we have inaccurately adjusted for or accounted for the confounding effect. And that means if we've done all this and remained with a confounded measure, it means that there is residual confounding. It's like coming from residue. It means the confounding was not completely eliminated. Okay? Now, how does this tend to happen? Most of the times, it happens because we identified our potential confounder but didn't measure it accurately. Okay? For example, we had our indoor-outdoor spreading. We may know that having an indoor job or an outdoor job is a potential confounder between being male and having malaria. We measure our being male, we know who is male and who is female. We also measure our malaria, we know who has malaria and who doesn't. But this issue, the third factor, do you have an indoor job mostly, or do you spend your work most of the time outdoors? Now, sometimes that we don't measure it accurately. It depending on self-reports. Sometimes someone spends most of their day out and then they'll tell you they're not sure, or they are doing mostly indoor, so they are misclassified. Once you misclassify groups of that factor, you have not measured it well. Even if you include that factor and you didn't measure it properly, they will remain residual confounding. Okay? Sometimes there are other factors of interest that you do not consider. Remember here we listed age, socioeconomic status, you can have HIV status, you can have indoor or outdoor job as your 4 confounders. They are confounding your relationship between being male and having malaria. But on your data, you only collected data on age, common, gender. You forgot to collect data on socioeconomic status. And yet socioeconomic status is one of the factors that confound the being male having malaria association. You will adjust for socioeconomic status, you adjust for age, you will adjust for gender. You will not be able to adjust for socioeconomic status because you didn't measure it. You will forget to measure it, so you will not include it in your model because you simply won't have data about it. That factor will remain confounded. Did you adjust for age and other confounders? Yes. Did you forget 2 or 3 other confounders? Yes. If you did, your measure, even after going through these analyses, will remain confounded. And that is what they call residual confounding. The other third factor here, which we're talking about here in this last point here, is that sometimes you have your exposure outcome association, but it is weaker than the confounding variable. Being male and getting malaria, is there a risk? Yes. Our odds ratio was 1.7. So there's a risk. But that 1.7 may be weaker than the relationship between, for example, being outdoor and having malaria, regardless of whether you're a man or a woman. So once the confounder is strongly related to either the exposure or the outcome, and yet the exposure and the outcome themselves are weak, you're likely to have residual confounding. Risk of getting malaria once you spend outdoor is likely to be strong. You might find here you'll get an odds ratio of 8.5, and yet for the being male and having malaria, you have 1.7, very weak. So your interest is the being male and having malaria. It is your main exposure outcome, but it is weaker than the third factor. So you will adjust for this third factor, but because it is so strongly linked to their outcome, the factor will remain residually confounding. So residual confounding, many times, is the way we look at literature, how much widely we have read, how we measure our confounder and our exposures, and how we adjust for these, how accurately. So in other words, the take-home message is that once you're measuring exposure, you're interested in measuring it accurately. You're interested in measuring your outcome accurately. It is equally important for you to get valid results. It's equally important that you include all possible confounders and you measure them as accurately as you measure exposure and your outcome. That way, you're likely to adjust for them and keep the confounders to a minimum, and then you get the best or most valid measure of association.